Hey, welcome back. Today's video, I'm going to answer a question that I get so frequently, it's not even funny. And I bet the gunsmiths get it more often than I do. And that is, I have a new barrel, I have a new cartridge, I have new brass. Can I do load development while I'm fireforming, or should I fireform first? Well, let's talk about it, because there's a lot of considerations in determining whether you should do load development with brand new brass or not. The first consideration is the quality of the brass that you purchase. Head stamps matter. It doesn't matter if it's Alpha, Lapua, Norma, or any of the other premium brass out there, you're probably going to have a pretty acceptable outcome doing load development during fireforming. However, if you're buying brass from who knows where that looks like it was created with a hammer and a punch out of a big flat sheet of brass, you might want to fireform first. Because variations in the brass are going to cause variations in the velocity, and those variations in velocity are going to make it really hard to find where the tune window is. It's all about the conservation of energy. The physics law, conservation of energy, because you cannot create nor can you destroy energy. You can only convert it from one form to another. That same energy that gets into your car as gasoline is then converted into mechanical energy to drive your car forward. When you need to stop, you step on the brakes. That creates friction, which converts that energy into heat in the brakes. You get the idea. You're not creating nor are you destroying energy. You're just changing it from form to form. So back to our problem at hand, the first time you fire a piece of brass, it's going to have to stretch to fit the chamber. That stretching consumes some of the energy from the powder. When it consumes that energy, that's less energy available to propel the bullet down the barrel, which means that the second firing is going to go faster with the same charge than the first firing did, except under the most extreme circumstances of oversizing and or a very tight-fitting piece of brass brand new from the factory. If your brass doesn't fit as tight as can be right out of the box, you're probably going to see a reduction in velocity from your fully formed brass velocity. It's not a big deal, and you can work around it, but you have to be aware that it's going to be there, because there's nothing worse than trying to develop your final load for the rifle. You get all done through 400 or 500 pieces of brass, and you know exactly what the load for the rifle is. And then after the first sizing, you go to a match and, oh my God, the velocity's up. Now what do? It's not shooting well. By understanding the law of conservation of energy, you can anticipate these things happening. And then you just take 10 or 20 pieces, size them quickly while you're still fireforming, and do a quick experiment to see what it does to the velocity. You can then reduce the charge appropriately to get back down to the velocity you were at when you were in tune, and go on your merry way still shooting matches, just with a little less powder per bang. How much less? Well, the 6.5 Creedmoor with 153.5 grain hybrid target bullet reduced the charge 0.4 of a grain to maintain the 2,685 feet a second that I was shooting when I did the load development with brand new brass. And it shoots just the same at that velocity as it did with brand new brass. On the 6 Dasher, I found the velocity difference to be about 35 feet a second, which is about 0.3 of a grain of powder. In other words, coming down just a little bit on your charge, somewhere around 0.5 to 1%, is going to be just about right to keep you at the velocity you were at, which is going to keep you in the harmonic situation you were in before when you tuned the rifle. You might have to make a little tweak here, a little tweak there after you've come down, but honestly, you're going to be pretty close and pretty well within a window, especially if you found a good node. So guys, the answer to the question is it kind of depends. It depends on the quality of the brass you're buying. If you're buying stuff that was formed with a ball peen, hammer, and a punch, you're probably going to want to fireform first. On the other hand, if you get this high precision, high quality brass that comes with a big price tag, you're most likely to be able to do your load development while doing fireforming, as long as you understand that you're not developing the final powder charge. Instead, you're developing the velocity at which the rifle shoots with that brass. Now, in addition to doing load development, you can also shoot matches with brand new brass, and I do that all the time. You have to take some precautions in prepping the brass in order to get the best results out of it. You know, like low ES and SD, those things that seem to matter to everybody that shoots beyond about 1,000 yards. How I do that depends on the condition of the brass when it shows up here. If the outside diameter of the brass is small enough, I can just expand it with an expander mandrel and then trim, chamfer, and deburr it. Of course, following up with a nice bath in the corncob media for a couple hours in the vibratory cleaner. However, if the expander mandrel going through the brand new neck feels like throwing a hot dog down a hallway, you're going to have to size that brass first. Get that neck diameter down enough that the expander mandrel can do its job. And that's just one more step. It's a matter of feel. You're going to have to feel a little bit as you're running that mandrel through it to see if that mandrel's actually doing anything or not. Either way, you're going to need to tumble it in corncob media, preferably some older stuff that's got a little bit of lube built up in it, because that's going to lube the inside of the necks and prevent you from having to put neo-lube on the inside of every single neck one at a time with a Q-tip. If that's your jam, go for it. But for me, it's just too much work. I'd like to not have to do that in order to prevent galling between the bullet and that brand new, shiny, fresh brass neck. And I get good results out of it. My seating pressures are well under control on brand new brass. As a matter of fact, they're virtually identical to what they are on used brass. And as a result, I get very similar ES and SD numbers, even though the average velocity is different and requires a different charge to achieve it. So guys, my advice is pretty simple. If you need to have a perfectly tuned load for your final rifle, like match shooting rifle, you're going to want to buy the best possible brass you can find. Because buying lower quality brass is going to cost you a firing cycle in order to get that brass formed appropriately so that you can get into that final load development. Because what you find on the first firing might not be the true node, because you get fooled by big ESs and SDs because of all that various moving of brass around in the chamber. All right, guys, until next time, shoot straight, buy the quality of brass that suits your use, and I'll see you in the next video.